Hello and welcome to another beautiful day in the Austrian Alps. As you can see, I am wearing my work overalls. That means it is finally time to work on my motorcycle and swap the engine for a new, used but functioning one. So, let's go! As explained in the previous video, our rough plan to take out the existing engine from my Yamaha XJ6N is to start by taking out the liquids and the battery and then work our way from top to bottom to remove whatever is necessary to gently take out the engine from underneath the bike. First things first, we needed to get the bike stable. Since we'd be removing the entire engine, we placed it on jack stands and positioned the frame directly under an anchor point in the roof. This would allow us to lift the front end off the floor when needed. Next, it was time to drain the liquids. While David worked on loosening the rear wheel to have it ready when we removed the chain, I got started on draining the oil into a bucket. Since the oil was fresh from the last change and only had about 50 kilometers of use, we planned to reuse it. With the oil sorted, David disconnected and removed the battery. To keep it fresh for the new engine, we hooked it up to the charger. At the same time, I worked on removing the side covers and various brackets to gain better access and see what needs to be removed in the process. Coolant was next. Using an old canister to catch the liquid, we opened the radiator filling cap and drained the coolant by opening a hose by the water pump. We are not going to reuse the cooling liquid. Now onto the fuel. The fuel tank is held in by 2 screws in the front and 1 in the back. Once the front screws are removed, the fuel tank can be lifted to access the fuel line and electrical connections. Luckily, when removing the fuel line, the fuel automatically stops flowing. This makes the removal of the fuel tank a breeze. After disconnecting the fuel line and 2 electrical connectors, we took out the remaining bolt at the back and removed the tank. With the fuel tank off, we got a clear view of the air filter sitting on top of the throttle body. It's secured by a few screws and hose clamps where it meets the throttle body, plus another electrical connection. We loosened the clamps and removed the 4 exposed hoses and gently wiggled the air filter off.
So as you can see, we took off the fuel tank and the air filter. That now shows us the air intake flaps, which are responsible for the amount of air-fuel mixture being sucked into the combustion chamber. When you turn the throttle, it opens the flaps and more or less air-fuel mixture gets sucked in.
Since the throttle body is part of the engine and didn't seem to be in the way, we decided to leave it attached. Removing it while still in the bike would have been tricky, especially with some bolts being hard to reach. We did, however, need to remove the wiring harness that goes up to the fuel injectors, so we unplugged the 4 very difficult to reach fuel injector connectors. As we moved along, we alternated taking off covers, plates, hoses and bolts while carefully unplugging a multitude of electrical connections and sensors. With small hands and a lot of patience, we managed to get even the toughest to reach bolts out.
Fun fact, if you look closely, this is one of the wires we unplugged with the whole wire harness. It just goes down to here to a switch, which checks if the side stand is down or not, so you cannot drive with the side stand down.
Having readied the top half of the bike, it was now time to remove the exhaust. It is held up by 8 nuts on bolts sticking out from the cylinder head, as well as 2 more bolts on the underside of the bike. The exhaust has one electrical connection, the oxygen sensor. To remove the connection to the clutch, we took out the top bolt of the crankcase cover that was holding the clutch cable in place. We left the clutch cable hanging there. We also loosened and disconnected the shifter rod at this point, removing the connection point to the gearbox. At the same time, we took off the electrical connection to the starter cable. Next up, the chain. Instead of opening the chain that we had so recently riveted together, we opted for an easier method. We removed the rear wheel and left the chain intact. That way, we could just take the chain off the front sprocket and disconnect the engine from the drivetrain. Because space was tight at the front, I ended up removing the clutch actuator assembly temporarily to get the chain off the sprocket. To make the engine removal as smooth as possible, we also removed any brackets that were in the way, including the ones holding the exhaust in place. Since the radiator wasn't blocking the engine, we left it in place and just disconnected the hoses attached to the engine. Finally, we made sure to disconnect the oil level sensor that was bolted into the oil sump. Now came the real test. We positioned a jack under the engine and removed the 4 engine mounting bolts. Taking out one mounting bolt and another one, and there's these 2, and that one is really stuck. As we carefully began lowering the engine, we realized that the side stand was blocking it. So, while the engine was already resting on the jack, we took out the entire side stand and footrest assembly. As we continued lowering the engine, we discovered a few hidden connections tucked beneath a rubber cover at the front of the bike. Sitting atop the cylinder head was the air induction system, an emission system that injects fresh air into the exhaust ports to help burn off unburned fuel. Since its hoses and electrical connectors were hidden, we hadn't spotted them earlier. After wrestling the rubber cover off and disconnecting the electrical connections, 2 hoses and one last grounding wire at the back of the engine, it was finally time. With some careful maneuvering by alternating between lowering the engine on the jack and lifting the frame up in the air, as well as a whole lot of patience, David and I successfully lowered the engine out of the frame and put it next to the replacement engine. Success! Seeing the bike without an engine is an incredible moment. I had never done an engine swap before, and even though it's just a motorcycle engine, I feel really proud of tackling this job. Now it's time to prepare the new engine and get it installed. In the next video, we will be working on swapping several components on the 2 engines. For instance, the timing chain and clutch cover, as well as the clutch actuator assembly. Missing parts on the new engine will be added, such as the stator coil along with the crankcase cover and the starter motor. And we will ensure that all bolts and other materials on the new engine will be in good condition. We have now successfully taken out the engine in my motorcycle, and looking at the bike now, it looks so incredibly empty. You can basically only see the frame and a couple of other components, but really it looks so lightweight and as if there's really nothing to it. So the engine really is the heart of a bike. And now it is time to say thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode, in which we are going to replace the missing parts on the new engine from the old engine. And then after that, we will replace the engine. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.